So welcome, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for another Safe Australia online meetup or something to that effect. Looks like we have a fairly strong Australian contingent today. I can see some folks from Perth, Sydney. We are, of course, in Melbourne as always. And John, of course, is in Singapore. Paul, our guest for today is, I assume, in Brisbane. I didn't actually ask you, Paul.
I am, ma'am. Beautiful sunshine state.
It's actually nice here today. I know you don't believe me, but yeah, there is sun outside. I haven't been outside. It's probably cold, but it is sunny outside today. I met Paul, Adrian and I met Paul, I think it was February 2018. And it was kind of an interesting journey because the year before I'd had this email from a guy called Lawrence who worked for a company I'd never heard of called console.io or something like that. And he said, I'd like a quote for a leading safe class. And I gave him the quote and I never heard from him again. Such is my life. These things happen. And then somewhere in very early 2018, people have that quote, work for a different company, and they're emailing me from PCCW Global about the quote I gave Console 9 months ago. And I'm like, this is really weird. Anyway, you kind of just take the business, right? So I turn up with Adrian. I turn up with Adrian in Brisbane in the smallest possible meeting room that clearly Paul's organisation could find, where he has gathered his leadership from all across the globe, squished them into a room with us, and we have managed to run a leading safe. And I discover through that the company that was Console had been acquired by a different organisation called PCCW Global. So we went on to have some adventures with Paul, and he's been playing with the Scaled Agile Framework in various guises ever since. And we always get requests from you guys to hear about what's going on with SAFE in the real world. And I thought with 3 years under his belt now, Paul probably has some good war stories for you. So Paul is the CTO, CIO, SVP of technology. I don't know, he has like a heap of really fancy titles. That is his role in PCCW Global. I think were you one of the founders, Paul, of Console Connect? Is that your
first technology person to join the organisation?
Right. And you guys were acquired, I don't know, sometime in 2017, I'm guessing. Correct. And PCCW Global, for those not familiar, is I think a wholly owned subsidiary of Hong Kong Telecom. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Hey, what a win. Anyway, I'm going to let Paul talk for himself because he's great at that. Thank you very much for joining, Paul. For everybody else, usual things, video on if you can, questions through chat, and we'll read them out to Paul as we get an opportunity. And over to you, Paul.
Great. Thank you, Em. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. As Em mentioned, my name is Paul Gampe. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for PCCW Global, which is one of the operating divisions of Hong Kong Telecom. And it's interesting to hear Em's version of the acquisition story. So joined a Silicon Valley venture capital-backed startup in 2014, focused on creating connectivity as workloads begin to move to public cloud. Different forms of connectivity for those workloads emerged, and we were a startup that were acquired in November 2017. And that's where, as Em alluded to, that's where our journey around the Scaled Agile Framework really began. So I'm just going to share a few slides. As Em guessed, I'm using these as a talking point to help remind myself what I need to talk about. So what I wanted to talk about first is how we ended up with the Scaled Agile Framework, because I think it's a really important part of our engagement with Pretty Agile and the journey that we've been on ever since. So I had, majority of my career was in enterprise software. So I'd worked for a VP of engineering for Red Hat, it's a large enterprise software company, managing 1,000 developers worldwide. And despite the fact that it's a software company, Agile is not part of Red Hat's DNA at the time that I was there. So I worked with a lot of customers who had adopted Agile, but had never really deployed a framework. And so after the acquisition, so this is December 2017 through to when we started working with Em and Adrian in March, I toured all of PCCW Global's facilities worldwide. And part of that journey was to, so after the acquisition, they asked me to take on the CTO role and gave me different functions in the organization to lead. So part of that journey was meet and greet with new colleagues I would be managing, corporate services, our IT department, IP engineering, which operate the 6th largest network in the world, and various other acquisitions that PCCW Global had made prior to acquiring Console Connect. So there's a couple of development communities throughout Europe, in Athens and in London and Reading and in Belgium. So there's a world tour to meet all these different operations. So stepping back, PCCW Global is one of the largest international telecommunications providers, about 1,300 staff worldwide, 57 offices around the world, and speak over 35 languages within the company. So it's a very diverse multicultural community that we have inside the organization. And part of that tour, meeting with IP engineers, meeting with business leaders, meeting with software developers, I began to sense the traditional silos that Scaled Agile Framework is often used to identify and dissolve, and disconnects between the business and the technical community and the company. So I had a gentleman who was joining me on that tour, and as we'd fly from country to country, I'd often say, "Oh, Henry, I think something of an agile approach could really benefit the engagement between business and technology in the communities that I'm meeting." And so I kept, after each of these, it's probably a 6-week world tour, it became more and more obvious that most of my recommendations were around adopting an agile way of working. And that led to the quote that Em mentioned earlier. And I had looked at different agile frameworks from an academic perspective, LESS and SAFe and others. And Lawrence, who has worked with me for many years, had already done quite a lot of research into SAFe and said this was the right framework. So that's where our journey began. Training the lean agile leaders was perhaps, reflecting on this presentation, there's 2 things that I really wanted to share, and I'll summarize them in conclusions, but this one is perhaps the most important thing that I think we did in terms of our transformation. So whilst there had been some academic debate internally among the leadership about what framework to use and which one would be right for us, the different telecommunications providers around the world have adopted different frameworks. And the key thing, I think, once we began to do this leadership training with Pretty Agile, was that we committed. We ended any debate about whether this was the right framework for us or not, whether we believed in Agile or not. And as an entire senior management team, often referred to an executive leadership team here in Australia, but Global refers to an SM team. All of our senior management team, from hardcore network engineer, network operations executives, marketing, CEO, there was this collaborative commitment to transform, and for a need to transform. I think the one thing that really, I think, if I throw the question back to Em and Adrian, is that we left that training exercise and value stream identification workshop with a real sense of urgency that I didn't anticipate inside an organization of this size.
Yeah, you guys wanted to start to move really, really quickly. You went from really slow. So I think it took us, I think that first course was February, and that executive course, we did another visit with you and a few others in Hong Kong to basically get the okay to do that executive course. And I think that was June, July, August somewhere. And that executive course was the first or second week in October. And we went from to can we do this tomorrow? And we're all like, kinda.
Exactly. And I think the key takeaway there was that commitment. And, you know, as we've now 3 years on into our transformation journey, that commitment's never wavered. And in the conclusion part of this story, I can talk about how we've continued to leverage the framework further. But if we hadn't had that level of commitment and that level of discipline and rigor in applying the framework that Em and Adrian brought to us, I don't think we would have been as successful as we have been. And whether we're successful or not is arbitrary, but I'd certainly feel like success for me. So I want to talk a little bit about this identifying value streams, because it's really a critical part of the framework that in other colleagues I've worked with, you know, we've continued to expand our technology community worldwide. So we're recruiting here in Brisbane, but we recruit in Hong Kong, and we often encounter team members who've worked in other organizations that have adopted SAFe. And this component around value streams was a really important learning opportunity for us as an organization and me as a leader. Because what transpired is, I think Em and Adrian were expecting that we'd do the traditional methodology where what are our products? Can we put the products being delivered through a set of systems? Can we put those systems together? Can we identify the people who support those systems and form agile release trains? But the way that identifying value stream workshop transpired was of using it as an opportunity to think about where we wanted to be, not where we are. And so that allowed us to, certainly for me personally, that ability to leverage the framework to drive transformation. And the way that the organization had seen, you know, these connectivity industries under dramatic transformation, not just from a technical perspective, but if you look at the traffic patterns of connectivity around the world, as you can imagine, voice is declining, IP traffic is exploding, the way where traffic moves is now very different to where it was in the past. It needs to be on demand, it can't be a managed service. So the senior management team, who I'd only been with for a few months, really leaned into this opportunity and said, we're going to focus on self-service. We're going to focus on data, and we're going to focus on IoT. And that has been a real, that certainly presented lots of problems for us, as I'm sure Em and Adrian would love to share, because we weren't aligned specifically around revenue lines. And when you try to force a big ship to move, that obviously causes lots of challenges. But I don't want to de-emphasize how important that was for us. And of all the value of the Scaled Agile Framework, this value stream identification exercise was really, really valuable. So launching Agile Release Trains. So this is where it all began. The first train, and I'm just going to talk through each of the trains and some of the learnings that we've had as we've launched Agile Release Trains. This was, as I mentioned, the first one. So this is our data and IoT train. So this one would have launched in March of 2019. So yeah, about 6 months, I imagine, after the executive training program, value stream identification exercise, systems identification, inventorying all the systems, and then identifying the people who support the systems, forming Agile Release Trains, teams, and away we go. So what you see here is a combination of probably the biggest challenge that we faced as an organization. So we were a very small software development community, Silicon Valley, venture capital, very high velocity, product-centric development community. So we're 30 people, and then we're being acquired by an organization of just under 1,500. And we represented to them everything that they had hoped to achieve in their transformation. We were able to automate networks globally. We were able to provision services on demand. We are an ecosystem of platform economics, effectively. So the demand set that they brought to bear on this little development team was staggering. And you can see here by the number of people that came from our headquarters to participate in this planning exercise. And if we hadn't had the framework, I don't know how that integration would have gone. But we leaned right into SAFe and said, this is the way that we're going to operate, and this is what we're going to deliver in the next 90 days. And we did. We were within 90 days of the acquisition, we were automating the PCCW Global Network. So we had a software architecture, we had a methodology for engagement, and we were able to start to make progress, which I think is often a challenge faced when you're starting integrations, and particularly when you're being acquired for a particular technology asset. So that really is an important part for me, because the biggest challenge that we faced wasn't just trying to connect a software development mindset with a network engineering mindset. It was coming up with a common language to help everybody in the organization begin to understand what we're going to do, when we're going to do it. And that is where we started to identify some of the other aspects of the value of the framework, particularly around inter-train dependencies, which was a really challenging area for us to navigate. I'm going to pause here. So Em and Adrian were with me on this part of the journey. So I'm going to see if they've got anything they'd like to add that I've not covered.
I feel like I have to be really careful. I just love the photo of you two embracing there, Paul. It's one of my favorite executive leadership moments. Is we got to the end of your planning event, and pretty agile, we like to have the senior business person and the senior technology person do a handshake in front of the train. And take a photo, and these two guys hug. So that's the SVP of product, I think Jordi was at the time, and Paul embracing at the end of the first PI planning. But it really, I mean, it was a really, that was such an awesome week. Still such a highlight for us. Really fun group of people, and some of the things that were really exceptional about that from our perspective is you flew everybody in from wherever they need to come from. So you had folks there from Europe, from the UK, from the US, and from Hong Kong. All of us were in Brisbane, which was really really amazing. So it was really an exciting launch for us. I don't know if you want to add.
Thank you, and it was really exciting for us too. And a lot of the little, the subtle discipline that you've shared with us, always trying to protect us from making mistakes that you've seen other trains do in the past, has been copied and carried forward. And so, this process of getting the business and the technology leadership to commit to the plan is worldwide. Every train does that, even virtually. Now we have to do it over video. We do that ceremony because we know it's so important, because Em and Adrian said so.
I'd like to see a photo of a virtual hug one day, Paul.
All right. PI planning's at the end of June. I'll
look forward to it.
So then the second train we launched, and you can see here the confidence votes and the t-shirt brandings, corporate services. This is our traditional IT department. So I play a dual role in the organization. I'm both the Chief Technology Officer, leading the product development, particularly the self-service on-demand product set, but also play the CIO role. So I lead the internal functions. This would be your ERP, the accounts receivable, accounts payable, collaboration suite. And the real benefit that we got for this community, which is in Hong Kong here, was transparency. So we hadn't had, we had a PPITPC, a Project Planning Information Technology Planning Committee. And then when I joined that committee, there was well over 50 projects in flight, and a large suite of Gantt charts to track their delivery over time. And there really was a low level of confidence at points in the team's ability to deliver on time. And so as we began to do this Agile Release Train identification and launch, the key benefit from the Scaled Agile Framework for me from this one was to give the team confidence that when they said that they could commit to delivery in the next PI, then it would happen. And the community you see here have gone on to achieve predictability rates of above 90% since they've been operating. And this train launched in June 2019. And the real benefit, talking about agile ways of working, is this trust that's begun to develop. When a feature or an epic ends up in corporate services, this team is really trusted to deliver. All of their agile artifacts, their the PI planning, their feature backlogs, their weighted shortest job first allocation, their roadmap for feature delivery, really, really well done. And it's given this team, which originally had not a reputation for an inability to deliver, is now perceived as very reliable. And it's core, a part of transforming a traditional managed services telecommunications provider into a technology company is being able to do things like pay for invoices on demand and pay by credit card and provision services instantly and have a subscription revenue model. You can't do that without an agile ERP and an organization that's got a really good relationship with your financial function. So the business owner for this agile release train is our CFO. So we've got really strong business technology commitment, and all of our epics and our PI objectives are voted on by the business.
Well, there's a question in the chat. I'd be interested to hear if you've experienced challenges with time zones for PI planning now that you've moved to virtual, and if you have any tips on how to mitigate. And my bet is you guys are having all sorts of fun with time zones and virtual.
Yeah. So that's a great segue into our next agile release train, because this is photos probably in Reading or London. And so at this point in our journey here, this is our third agile release train we're launching, and you can see here I'm not there. So this is the first time we've been directly involved in all of the agile release train formation, and now we're beginning to expand internationally. So on the screen here, you see teams from Athens, from London, from Reading, from Belgium, from Hong Kong, and from the United States, and from South Africa, just to give you an example of the time zone challenges that we face as an organization. And here's where we really started, and this is in July 2019, and we really started to struggle with particularly inter-art dependencies. So this development community that you see here, predominantly built by a series of acquisitions prior to me joining via acquisition. So unified communications as a service platform, threat management system, mobility, data enrichment, and visualization technology. So really quite deep data science expertise and a large portfolio of online applications delivering a lot of value, but without any sort of framework to coordinate with predominantly the product and the business function operating out of Hong Kong. So the thing that I wanted to talk about on these slides is that we really started to see the silos break down once we had this group of disparate acquisitions aggregated into what we called Interstellar, but predominantly development community around our mobility and voice products. And immediately the tension started to decline between the technology and the business function, because there's sufficient knowledge around the Scaled Agile Framework. I think by now, by this point in July, we're probably approaching 200 people have been trained in Agile. We've started to engage with different coaches. So because of this European footprint, we involved a training team out of Europe. And the other thing we started to notice was the difference between pretty agile training and other training, and some of the ceremonies that we've now come to entrench in the way that we do Scaled Agile Framework have come from the learnings that we had from pretty agile. And so we even started to see the way epics and feature slicing was being taught to this community was different to the way that we had been taught to do it. And it's taken a while for us to unwind some of those challenges. So at this point in the journey, we're struggling with time zones. So not all the senior leadership are able to get to the PI planning events. We're beginning to see the benefits, certainly in terms of forming communities, but we're struggling with time zones. And where we ended up is, I'll comment on that when I get to the end, because we did a planning event in 2020 and I'll talk about the tooling. So then by September 2019, we're accelerating. At this point, we've identified all the agile release trains that we intend to launch. So we had marked 5 coming out of the workshop that we did with Em and Adrian. And here we are launching the IP connectivity. So this is the core revenue engine of the business. This is AS 3491 for anybody who's a technologist on the phone. Today, the 5th largest IPv4 network in the world. So very highly skilled, highly valued technical community, generating a lot of value for our users and for the enterprise. The takeaway for us here was 2 things. The framework immediately brought to light the workload, and there's not a lot of resistance, but there was certainly organizational resistance to adopting an agile way of working in this community. And you know, having been a network engineer in a prior career, I can see why. You know, if your application fails and your web page doesn't load, the general bias of the consumer is you hit reload and it's okay. You know, there's a tolerance for failure at the application layer. And it really took some time for me to spend with this community to remind myself that the blast radius for failure of the 5th largest network in the world is pretty big. So you really can't fail. And so when you're faced with that sort of pressure, you tend to resist change because you trust what you have done in the past, and it's given you this ability to deliver in the now, and if you anticipate it's going to give you the ability to deliver in the future. What we needed to do though was change, because delivering services via managed services with, you know, tickets and engineers logging into devices, you know, the error rate is still high if you've got human intervention, and it doesn't map to the way that organizations operate today. So you need agility, and so to do that you need to automate. And this community had been attempting automation. They knew it was there, but they weren't able to achieve it. So the Scaled Agile Framework gave us a way to have this community start to talk about epics and features and to start to slice work. So tools that they'd never had before. So they knew they wanted to automate, but they didn't know how to go from, I want to automate the network, to I want to automate a layer 2 service. I want to automate a layer 2 service between this port and that port. And so the framework is immensely beneficial in educating this community about how to begin to break down work. And I know that sounds trivial and obvious, but it was a real important learning for this, particularly this train. So what we learned though was, as we started to, and Em and Adrian are great at saying this, just bring all work onto the train. You know, whatever resistance you may have, you know, oh, I can only do 20% here. And we faced a lot of that, of saying, oh no, I can't be fully dedicated. So, well, you and all your work can come to the train and we'll visualize it and we'll see what it is. And that was really powerful. That was that disarmed a lot of reticence we had to implementing an agile release train around our core revenue engine. And so once we'd done that, you know, we brought all the work onto the train and said, wow, holy cow, this team is doing a huge amount of work. And we could start to see the metrics, you know, the tasks backlogs, the feature backlogs, the complexity that they were dealing with. And so that was my takeaway from this slide, is that just bringing work onto the train and using those tools of Kanban and were immensely valuable for us, because I hadn't seen that workload before. It wasn't structured in a way that where it was visible. And then the last thing I'd say here is that because the network is the core, you know, was our core asset, we could start to do inter-train dependencies. So okay, once we already had 2 trains in flight. Here we had this train data and IoT automating the network, but they'd sort of email a network engineer saying, can you do this config so that I can start to talk to this router? We could start to do inter-route dependencies, and release train engineers would begin to coordinate and said, when's your PI planning? I've got a backlog of features I need you to implement. So we saw this emerging lean portfolio management function occur organically as we got up to our 4th agile release train here. And then again, another train where I'm not present. This is our delivery and support agile release trains. This is at the end of 2019. And this is where the sufficient knowledge about the Scaled Agile Framework had gone beyond the community that were directly reporting to me. So, I appreciate the bias in an organization. Everybody who works for me is going to go do Agile because I told them to do Agile. When here, what you see is a community that's just had access to training. So by the end of 2019, we've formed our own Lean Agile Center of Excellence. Em and Adrian have trained quite a few SPCs in the organization, and we're now taking on that training load ourselves. And people are volunteering to get trained. And what you see here is our support organization, which is large. Between 300 and 400 staff worldwide. We've got network operations center everywhere in the world, saying we think we can form an agile release train, and we think we can really benefit from doing so. And we have Jupiter and Mars and feature teams start coming together, and they identify systems, and they identify backlog, and they decide what they want to achieve. And it was really, really powerful and wonderful to watch this agile release train form and take flight. At this point, I'm more looking after the technology trains, and then we start to see interdependencies between the support and the technology organization. So great to see. Beside the traditional scaled Agile Framework implementation roadmap, you may have seen that I added this last item, which integrate release trains into our digital platform. And I know Em and Adrian are great fans of digital platforms. And so we actually had a vision of building a digital platform. Because we've actually achieved quite a lot of our transformation. And so by the end of 2019, this is starting to look like it could be real, like we actually could build a platform economic model because of the successes we've had in moving a lot of our value into on-demand services. So ambitiously, we decided we're going to launch a platform agile release train and begin to get that layer of functionality needed to unlock the other agile release trains. And here it is. So this is actually at PI Planning in January in 2020 in Hong Kong, weeks before, actually probably only days before COVID-19. We learned a lot about the platform agile release train. The key takeaways for us was two things. One, by this point, our lean portfolio management function has started to provide some pretty rich data. So as we're launching this train, we now know how much of our economic investment is in Horizon 1. We know how much is in Horizon 2, and we know how much is in Horizon 3. And we know the profile's not looking the way we want it to. So by having all of our epics and all of our features categorized and an economic model where we invest in sustainable, long-lived agile release trains, we can quite categorically say, okay, this is how much we're spending per annum on Horizon 1 and Horizon 2 and Horizon 3. So by now we're starting to get fed with intelligence to help make good decisions. And one of the decisions we said is, okay, we're starving Horizon 3. We really believe, and I personally believe, that distributed ledger technology is critical to the success of the telecommunications industry. The idea that I'm going to have a long-lived permanent internet connection from an IoT device is just nonsensical. This IoT device has got a 30-minute lifespan or a 1-year lifespan. It needs to connect to a cloud, and then it's going to go away. But there could be 10,000 of those IoT devices. Are you going to settle for that? Are you going to pay by invoice? Are you going to pay by credit card? It's not, the transaction volumes begin to exceed traditional payment methodology. So we needed to start research into distributed ledger. And we work with the MEF, MC-BAN and TM Forum and GSMA. So we're now deeply involved, the teams you see here, in collaborative proof of concepts around using distributed ledger, not only to settle, but inventory management between carriers. So to get that expertise, we had to start to integrate third parties. And Em and Adrian were going back to our first lessons in learning, treat everybody as a first-class citizen. And so you see here 3 companies that are not ours, all wearing our t-shirts, all at our events, planning collaboratively with us it's a precursor whenever I start talking to vendors saying, have you got anybody trained in Scaled Agile Framework? Because if you don't, we're going to train you and then you can come to plan with us, because we're not negotiating on how we deliver value. And so that was really, really important for us to be able to get the investment into our Horizon 3, because you can't just go build a distributed ledger technology team. So we had to work with startups and other companies. So that was really important for us to have that learning about treating third parties as first parties when we go into planning. And this is, I don't know if Em and Adrian ever knew this, but it led to 2020 Global PI Planning. We had over probably 500 to 600 people in Hong Kong doing a full all 6 Agile Release Train launch. And I'm very happy to report we even have a SAFE program contributor award ceremony. And I know Em and Adrian are familiar with how the Hong Kong team can run a great show. And it was to watch the polish and finesse of an event planning team in Hong Kong combined with the Scaled Agile Framework. So we're going to do SAFE really well. And it was great. It was a huge event. We had, release train engineers running between meeting rooms. We actually started planning an internet on demand, which for any network engineer on the call would begin to understand when we talk about blast radius of failure. We left this event so confident that we could automate the internet. And we did actually put that into production at the end of last year. So a real highlight of my career and a real highlight in terms of the impact the Scaled Agile Framework can have on an organization leading this event. What it did for us though, was allow us to touch all of the 400 technologists and the 100 and 200 business community inside the organization, and establish ways of working which gave me 2 things: really high level of assurance that as the pandemic began to sweep around the world, and for an organization that's operating in 57 offices around the world and over almost 1,500 staff, I got to live through the pandemic hitting London, hitting Reading, hitting Belgium, hitting Virginia. I had staff in every one of these locations. And the 2 things that really I reflect on through 2020 is that because we did this, I knew that every single colleague was on a feature team. Everybody had a scrum master who was caring about them. Everybody had a product owner to tell them how they can add value to the organization, irrespective of what may be going on around them. You can continue to deliver value. Here's your features, here's your backlog, here's what we need you to do. That focus, you could see the value of it as everybody's personal experience turned from this great moment to sadness and loss. And those agile ways of working to me are always going to be around the Scrum team, and that relationship and the community and the value you get to deliver by being part of that. And we didn't lose a beat. COVID-19, economic impact for sure, but in terms of our ability to have greater than 95% predictability for our arts, for us to go to market with a world first product, we did it. We didn't miss a beat. And I'm really, really grateful for the framework, for that side of the framework in terms of what we've been able to achieve. And so in closing, I know we've only got a few minutes left, and I'm sure Em and Adrian are fielding a big backlog of questions. So when I was being approached by Adrian for some other activities, I leaned into the opportunity and said, "Hey, Adrian, we're actually thinking of changing our value streams." And she said, "Yeah, sure, why not? It's a great retrospective inspecting that happens." Oh, good, okay. We're not the only ones who are crazy enough to give it a go. We may, in fact, be the ones to do so. But over the last 3 years, we're seeing the power, as I started this journey with how you define your value streams transformed the company. When we said we want to focus on self-service and we want to focus on delivering on demand, we did it. And what that's done is it's put us in a position at the beginning of this year saying, actually our journey's not done. We think there's another phase of our evolution, and the big steering wheel that we had to turn the organization last time, let's use it again. So we're now completely redefined our value streams and want to deliver value in a new way, where we're completely in the mindset that we're a technology company, we're a platform economic model, and one day you're a supplier and one day you're a consumer, and we're just a platform that allow infrastructure and applications to come together. And so we're doing it again. We've designed a whole new set of value streams. We've identified systems associated with those people in those value streams. We're redesigning agile release trains. We're keeping the unit of measure to the feature team, and I think that's really important psychologically. And when we're moving feature teams to align to new value streams, but we're doing it again. And that's part of our transformation. So, when the journey with Scaled Agile Framework, the organization was a managed services global carrier. Now we're the meeting place of applications and infrastructure, and we're on to the next stage of our journey. So I had here the last, everybody knows the lessons learned bit, but here's my lessons learned. Commitment was key. Mark Holtfinger, who Em and Adrian know well, the CEO of PCCW Global, is an unwavering advocate of the Scaled Agile Framework and the benefits of Agile way of working. Never at once has he ever strayed from that position. And it's been incredibly valuable and powerful to help the transformation. I often get colleagues send me, SAFe isn't agile. Yeah, I'm sure everybody on this call must get that all the time. And I certainly get it a lot. And my answer is, it's not trying to be. Agile's a mindset. Agile's caring for your community. It's empowering people to do valuable work for users who are going to appreciate the value, and transparency and trust. That's what Agile is to me. The Scaled Agile Framework is a framework, and it's a really good framework. It's all of these other things you need to help an organization build successful Agile teams. So yeah, it's not Agile. It's not trying to be. It's a framework, and it's a really good one. Be willing to adapt. So I brought in the story about bring the workload to the train. Part of helping a very large scale organization with a really successful revenue engine agree to want to change is by being open and saying, okay, that's not development work, it may be operational work, but we're still going to bring it on the train. There's still something here to help create visibility or create dependency management. And that was really important to disarm the more successful parts of our organization to be willing to adopt new ways of working. Inspect and adapt, we're pretty religious. We do retros every 2 weeks. We do inspect and adapt at the end of every PI. We produce lots of artifacts, lots of statistical analysis. And the important thing here is that we're even doing it at the value stream level. It's not just a tool for a Scrum team. It's a tool for our executive leadership teams, and we continue to inspect and adapt. And then the great quote, of course, change is never painful, only the resistance to change is painful. So thank you. I hope I covered enough ground for you, Em.
You did great, and it was wonderful to hear the continuation of the story, Paul. We get snippets because you send folks to our classes. Anytime someone lands in the class, we go, tell us stuff. So I can't remember who, but someone turned up in the class not too long after your global planning and told us all about that. And of course, we watch your adventures on LinkedIn, which is really fun. Some really massive Zoom meetings in the last year. If you don't mind, just a couple of questions for you, Paul, from John Andrews. Hi, Paul. Fascinating journey and really impressive. Do you also run a large solution SAFe and have an STE in your setup? If so, I'm interested in how you introduced this role and what challenges you faced. Thank you.
Great question, John. Yeah. So we do have we've just started that at the beginning of this year. So there'd been in one of the 2 program increments ago, the senior management team is so committed to this transformation that will often join, inspect and adapt. And so we had the trifecta from all 6 agile release trains present their performance. What was your program predictability like? Let's go through the letters to management. And there's a consistent theme of feedback coming, we need a solution level. And I got quite agitated with the feedback, and I said, this is just poor inter-dependencies. You're not trying to coordinate work across the whole, 6 agile release trains. You need to get more disciplined at getting your feature backlog to your respective product manager on time. I said, but let me show you what a solution is. And we're going through a branding exercise to introduce a new look and feel. You'll notice the slide deck I just presented is quite different to what we do in the past. So I said, okay, you want to change the branding, and marketing thinking, oh yeah, that's a 20-minute logo slap on an invoice. We update the website and we're done. So let's talk to all the system architects about what change your brand might look like. I think we took about 8 weeks. We identified 23 systems. We were starting to get projectable, maybe 3 or 4 program increments. Said, you need a solution train engineer, don't you? And they said, okay, yeah, right, we get it now. We've got to try to coordinate a large body of work across a large body of agile release trains. I understand what a solution manager and a solution train engineer is. And particularly now that we're moving to a new value stream architecture, we are really going to need that solution layer quite a lot, because we're using it to transform the business again, moving away from product silos and thinking more holistically about features. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. From Rob Howard, Paul, great story, well told. Can I ask when you were deciding to go with a framework, and which one? As CTO, how did you get other executives buy-in, given the change you probably knew this would entail? I'm going to enjoy the answer to this. I remember this.
Okay, good question, Rob. One of the reasons that PCCW Global is so successful is because it takes an economic outlook. HKT, as our parent, has fantastic financial discipline, and M&A do know it. And that discipline is a real strength in decision-making if you know how to use it effectively. So part of the Scaled Agile Framework, as opposed to bringing in McKinsey or LESS or any of the other frameworks, is that readily available trainers worldwide. So that was a lower cost for us. All of the content is available online on the Scaled Agile Framework website. 0 licensing fee to gain access to knowledge. And certification is adding value to our employees. So we're investing in our staff and they can see it. So from the purely economic model, I was very easily able to position the Scaled Agile Framework as the right one for us, as opposed to not dismissing McKinsey and the great work they do helping transformation in other companies. But for us, it was really an economic decision. And this was the one that had the highest return on investment in our colleagues and the clearest cost that we could map out to get underway.
Thanks, Paul. Good info. Appreciate it.
One from Anand. Hi, Paul. Thanks for the insightful session. What measures were used to pivot epics?
Pivot epics. Sorry, I might need more context for that question.
I thought maybe Anand had picked up on something you'd said, and I thought, oh, I don't know if I heard those words, and now you're going, I don't think I said those words. So Anand, I don't know if I'm trying to see you on my screen.
Hi, this is Anand.
Hi, Anand.
Hi. Thanks, Paul, for the wonderful session. So this one was so when you are basically hypothesis on an epic and then desiring to plan further investment towards it, creating more to it. So what kind of typically the measures you used to pivot or proceed further?
Great. Yep. So leading indicators. Often
yes.
What we're learning is that taking a hard economic measure is not appropriate. Particularly what we're finding is some of the features and products we're bringing to market are, in one case, world first. So there's not a lot of market awareness. And so that means there's a market education lead time to getting revenue from a product. So we're looking more now at leading indicators like the number of monthly average users, the funnel, how much interest are we able to drive through having this feature in production, as opposed to just, did we achieve X dollars of revenue in the first 90 days after delivery? So we're thinking further upstream, looking left into metrics and then seeing if we hit them, and if not, why not?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we have exhausted the written questions, so I don't know if anyone's holding back, waiting for the floor to ask Paul the big question. You were too informative, Paul. I think this is clearly the challenge.
A time box here, right? I can see the little clock you have in the background counting down.
Yeah. I thought about putting one up for you, and I thought, oh, you're probably programmed by now. You'll be fine.
It's here beside me on my desk.
Lovely.
No, Lawrence went and bought 3 of them, right?
Oh, nice. Always like that, Lawrence. All right, folks. Yeah, it looks like we have met everybody's needs. Thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time to share the journey. It was really lovely to relive the 2018, 2019 journey where we were really working with you guys intensely, and great to get that full update. It's a really impressive story. We've really appreciated being part of your journey, and then we look forward to continuing to encounter your team in various events as you continue to grow your safe capability. Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us.